Ukraine is mounting aggressive and rapid counteroffensives. In a week defined by counterattack operations, Ukrainian forces compelled Russian troops to retreat on two fronts through a pair of large-scale coordinated strikes. This represents a major embarrassment for Moscow. Russian soldiers are scattering in disarray, like headless chickens, when confronted with Ukrainian assaults unlike anything they have previously encountered. On the Ukrainian side, these counteroffensives are disrupting Russia's 2026 war plans. Ukraine's pincer maneuver unfolded on the Dnipro and Oleksandriivsk fronts, both forcing humiliating Russian withdrawals that will create significant challenges for Moscow's 2026 strategy. Details on what transpired at Oleksandriivsk and why it matters will follow later in this analysis. Before diving deeper, drop comment number 2 if you support Ukraine, number 3 if you support Russia, and number 4 if you love peace. First, consider the Dnipro River and the stretches of territory that Russia once believed it held firmly under control. For months, Russian forces maintained positions on small islands in the Dnipro. Putin's troops assumed they were secure against any Ukrainian counteraction. After all, they occupied islands. Any Ukrainian assault would require ferrying soldiers across water, exposing them fully to Russian drone strikes and other fires. Russia understood this vulnerability well, having spent much of 2025 expending troops in near-suicidal missions to seize those very islands. They succeeded at enormous cost, and Putin assumed Ukraine would hesitate to mirror such risky operations for fear of heavy personnel losses. By holding these islands, Russian forces launched drone strikes against Ukrainian troops and civilians along the Dnipro's banks. The islands served as launch pads, enabling attacks on elevated Ukrainian positions on the riverbank and strikes into Dnipro city itself, a key Russian objective. Ukraine could not allow these assaults to continue unchecked. Yet a direct amphibious assault on the islands was impractical. So, while Russia basked in its apparent success and pressed its campaign of terrorizing Ukrainian civilians, Ukrainian military leaders devised a plan. If moving troops onto the islands was unfeasible, they needed a smarter alternative. What emerged was a three-phase plan to systematically degrade Russia's island-based force structure, culminating in its complete collapse, one of the most intelligent counteroffensives observed in the Ukraine war to date. Ukraine Today reported on all three phases in a February 17 article citing RFU intelligence. Phase 1 deliberately avoided any approach to the Dnipro River and its islands. Ukraine correctly assessed that the isolated Russian units on those islands required supplies to survive. Commanders also identified that much of the aerial pressure on Dnipro stemmed from Russian command posts and storage sites established along the riverfront, targets that demanded elimination. Armed with this intelligence, Ukraine delivered a lethal dose of poison to Russia's forward lines. Ukrainian Venom unit drone operators began striking positions used by Russia as drone storage and launch sites. These were no ordinary drone attacks. Ukraine employed specially modified drones carrying powerful TM-62 anti-tank mines fitted with stabilizing fins, allowing air-dropped delivery to targets. Think of it as a miniaturized glide bomb tactic. This approach proved highly effective, as Ukraine has repurposed TM-62 mines for various roles over recent months. In January, Forbes reported that these mines had become versatile weapons. Originally Soviet-era designs containing about 16.5 pounds of high explosive, the TM-62 remains one of the world's most widely used anti-tank mines. Russia expected Ukraine to employ them conventionally, creating minefields to slow Russian armor. Instead, Ukraine developed a modernized variant, dubbed TM-2025, 3D printed with both electromechanical and secondary fuses for remote detonation. This brings us back to Phase 1 of Ukraine's Dnipro strategy. The Venom unit delivered TM-62s airborne against Russian positions, leveraging enhanced remote fusing capabilities to inflict devastation. Russian logistics depots and command facilities suffered severe degradation in these blasts, crippling their drone reconnaissance and counterstrike capacity. Russia's Dnipro Island forces grew more vulnerable than ever, yet Ukraine held back from immediate advances. Instead, it executed Phase 2. This time, Ukrainian FPV drone teams targeted Russian river crossing routes by boat and reinforcement paths across the Dnipro. As noted earlier, severing supplies to island units would spell disaster for Putin's forces. That was precisely Phase 2's objective in Ukraine's brilliant counteroffensive strategy. With supply lines under constant attack, Russia could no longer evacuate wounded from the islands. Troops were left to die and rot among their comrades. Ukrainian drones destroyed enemy motorboats approaching the islands, cutting off access to essentials like food and water needed for survival.
Russia resorted to drone resupply attempts for its soldiers, but Phase 1 had rendered that nearly impossible. At this point, Russian troops on the Dnipro Islands descended into desperation. Some tried fleeing using reed bushes for cover, only to be shredded by Ukrainian drones. Meanwhile, Ukraine targeted command and observation posts in occupied Oleksandriivsk areas. This element had been prepared over months. Even before Russia seized the Dnipro Islands, Ukraine destroyed the Oleksandriivsk bridge with an AASM Hammer guided bomb launched from a MiG-29 fighter. Similar strikes eliminated other command and observation sites. This phase stripped away more of Russia's eyes and ears on the Dnipro force and disrupted its command chain.
If island forces became vulnerable after Phase 1, they descended into terror, isolation, and starvation after Phase 2. Then came Phase 3. With Russian units cut off, Ukraine systematically weakened their already chaotic defenses through relentless, accumulating strikes directly against personnel. Those Russian soldiers lacked drone cover. Phase 1 had eliminated that. They received no orders or warnings due to Phase 2 disruptions. All they could do was scatter in panic, hoping Ukrainian drones and fires would pass them by. Bunkers were destroyed. Remaining logistics points for drone-drop supplies were wiped out. Whenever Russian troops foolishly clustered, a Ukrainian strike followed immediately. Gradually, continuous FPV drone attacks and strikes eroded defensive infrastructure, forcing Dnipro Island forces to choose, die on the islands or flee. Many wisely chose the latter, much like forces at Oleksandriivsk, covered shortly. Citing intelligence data, Ukrainian military spokesman Vladislav Voloshin stated that Russia withdrew from several Dnipro islands as Ukraine's three-phase strategy inflicted severe damage to morale and psychological state. No one can fault those soldiers. They did exactly what Ukraine anticipated after the counteroffensive severed supplies and left them facing obliteration if they stayed. Now, per RFU reports, Russia's senior command views holding the Dnipro Islands as futile. Russia lacks resources to sustain troops there. That means Russia's launch pads for drone strikes into Dnipro and surrounding areas have vanished. Do not underestimate this for Ukraine. Militarily, it allows Ukrainian forces along the Dnipro bank greater operational freedom. They may not fully reoccupy the islands. That remains to be seen. But emptying them eliminates a major Russian attack vector, significantly easing pressure on Ukrainian units, actively fortifying stronger positions for the rest of 2026. Yet the counteroffensive's impact resonates more profoundly on the civilian front. Russia has waged a terror campaign against Ukrainian non-combatants since Putin's invasion began. In October, Reuters reported Russian drone teams deliberately hunted civilians with their flying monsters in a twisted form of human prey, making normal life impossible in Ukraine. Russian terror escalated in 2025, driving a 26% rise in civilian casualties over 2024. Action on Armed Violence reported 2,248 civilians killed by Russia last year, plus 12,493 wounded from drone attacks on cities. Many such casualties likely occurred in Dnipro. With Dnipro River islands cleared, residents in adjacent areas can breathe somewhat easier.
Now, if the first counteroffensive alleviated pressure, the second prepares for a summer Russia intends to turn into an attritional war against Ukraine. On February 17th, Militarny reported comments from Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Oleksandriivsk, stating Ukraine continues counteroffensive operations in the Oleksandriivsk area near the key city of Ghuliai-Pole. Ukrainian airborne assault and standard assault forces actively engage here, pushing through gray zones where small Russian infiltration units operated, clearing them out. Our units are conducting effective counterattacks and assault operations, efficiently employing unmanned systems, artillery, and electronic warfare assets, Siersky reported during a frontline visit. The Ukrainian commander affirmed that liberating targeted territories remains a top priority, but forces must do so smartly to preserve as many lives as possible. That may be the crux of Ukraine's second counteroffensive.
To many, retaking territory in Oleksandriivsk appears a prelude to a much larger counteroffensive, perhaps a deep thrust into Ghuliai-Pole. But reality differs, as will become clear shortly. Instead, mirroring the three-phase Dnipro plan, Ukraine systematically eliminates Russian occupiers to reclaim strategic ground for a vital purpose as mid-2026 approaches. What has the Oleksandriivsk campaign achieved? In short, significant Ukrainian gains that will prove crucial ahead.
Militarny illustrated this with maps showing localized Ukrainian advances across multiple frontline segments from February 9 to February 16. In the Oleksandriivsk and Ghuliai-Pole sectors, Russian lines were pushed back substantially, enabling Ukraine to liberate several settlements and clear surrounding areas for purposes revealed below. Per the Telegraph, this Oleksandriivsk push coincided with a broader Zaporizhia advance, yielding Ukraine's largest territorial recovery since the failed large-scale 2023 summer counteroffensive against Moscow's invaders.
Overall, the outlet reported Ukraine recaptured 202 square kilometers, 78 square miles, from Russia in 5 days. To rub salt in Russia's wounds, this matched roughly what Russia seized throughout December 2025. What unfolded stems from a Russian setback in early February, loss of Starlink access. The headless chicken analogy repeated here applies fully to Russian troops in Oleksandriivsk. After SpaceX disabled illegal Starlink terminals Russia used for everything from long-range drone strikes to frontline communications, Russian forces found themselves leaderless. Estimates suggest up to 90% of units lost connectivity, vital for organizing attacks on Ukrainian defenses. Predictably, such assaults largely halted. Those continuing were clumsy and disorganized. As Russian soldiers grew isolated from higher command due to communications failure, Ukraine seized opportunities in places like Oleksandriivsk and Zaporizhia. Another underreported fact, this latest counteroffensive wave builds on Ukraine's late 2025 actions. In December, Interfax reported Ukraine retook territory in Udachne, Grishine, and Kotline settlements west of besieged Pokrovsk. Those were smaller gains than today's, but they signaled Ukraine shifting to offensive posture against Russia. Once again, an outstanding Ukrainian strategy underpins it all.
Though accelerated by Russia's Starlink loss, Ukraine long-positioned artillery, logistics, drone teams, and most forces 6 to 12 miles behind Russian positions. This created a vast gray zone teeming with Ukrainian drones, a deadly trap for Russian troops. What appears in Oleksandriivsk now results from that gray zone strategy. With Russian infiltrators weakened, Ukrainian airborne assault and infantry groups advanced to reclaim territory Russia held only tenuously.
Russia still attempts deep probes into areas Ukraine now recaptures, but per Syrskyi they achieve little success. The enemy persists in attempts to breach our combat formations and launches continuous attacks, including with fires, but without significant success, Syrskyi stated in a telegram post. The Ukrainian commander added, "Defender forces hold their lines and positions firmly, frustrating enemy intentions and inflicting substantial losses in manpower and equipment."
Russia's efforts to sustain momentum at Oleksandriivsk and elsewhere reveal the true purpose of Ukraine's second counteroffensive. Ukraine masses resources to seize territory now in preparation for what lies ahead. Make hay while the sun shines, so to speak. More accurately, clear Russian occupiers while they hunker frozen in gray zone bunkers.
Ukraine seeks to transform gray zones into liberated territory because it prepares for a summer when Russia reportedly plans renewed major offensives. A February 9th Kyiv Post article noted Russia spent months building strategic reserves for large-scale attacks on eastern and potentially southern Ukrainian areas in late spring and summer.
If this echoes Russia's failed 2025 summer offensive, which failed to take Pokrovsk or create northeast buffers as Putin desired, you are correct. This time, Russia aims for Slovyansk and Kramatorsk in Donetsk, per Kyiv Post, ultimately forcing Ukrainian ground forces into a major battle for destruction. Ukraine would be foolish to fight on Putin's preferred terms. The new summer offensive appears designed to train into conventional warfare Russia favors, abandoning asymmetric approaches for head-on slugfests.
Of course, Ukraine refuses. That explains seizing as much territory as possible now. Every square meter will fill with defensive lines and fortifications. Ukraine used to shred Russian troops at places like Pokrovsk. View Oleksandriivsk's actions as pushing back Russian lines to convert former gray zones into even deadlier kill zones. Ahead of Russia's projected 100,000 troops summer offensive, Ukraine forces Russia to fight for recapture of ground it may intend as staging areas. This is brilliant. Why? Recall Russia's strategic reserve buildup for summer. If Russia must retake liberated territory now, it feeds more troops into Ukrainian kill zones. Those troops get destroyed, compelling Russia to expend reserves Putin wanted preserved for summer. The more reserves Ukraine eliminates at Oleksandriivsk and elsewhere, the weaker Russia's summer push becomes. This forces Putin into a 2025 summer rerun. Russia will be left with grand plans and grander claims in ruins, all thanks to Ukraine's series of precise, intelligent counteroffensives that sacrifice little for massive gains. As the Atlantic Council noted in January, Ukraine's current defensive systems exact a steep price from Russia in finances and blood for meager gains. With those gains reversed at Oleksandriivsk, Russia pays that price again before contemplating summer advances. Russia lacks what it takes to pay. It exhausted resources long ago. After 4 years of fighting, the Ukraine war has ended for Putin. He remains too ignorant to realize it. His foolish strategies inflicted the largest manpower losses in modern Russian military history, and matters will only worsen for Russia from here.
In yesterday's video, the question was, how long does the average survival time lasts for a new Russian recruit with only 10 days of training thrown into Zaporizhia? The correct answer was A, about 3 to 5 days.
Ukrainian FPV drones and artillery sweep unskilled soldiers with near zero chance of surviving a week. That brutal reality defines Russian troops today. Now for today's question. To recapture territories Ukraine reclaimed last week, how many lives does Russia pay per square kilometer? Answer A, about 50 soldiers per 1 square kilometer. Answer B, more than 150 soldiers per 1 square kilometer. Reply in the video comments, and the correct answer will appear in tomorrow's video. Don't forget to comment. Number 2 if you support Ukraine, number 3 if you support Russia, or number 4 if you love peace.